Welcome to Stories, Fables, Ghostly Tales, where I explore the eerie, the unexplainable, and the deeply human stories that stay with us long after the final words are spoken. Today I bring you something different, an audiobook-esque experience based on true events titled Until We Meet Again. This is a story of friendship, loss, and the unexplained, where love and science intertwine with something beyond our understanding. It is a tale of devotion, of a life well lived, and of a bond that endures even after death. But it is also a story of grief, illness, and the mysteries that surround our final moments. Before we begin, a sensitivity warning. This episode contains themes of terminal illness, loss, and the afterlife. While handled with care and respect, these topics may be emotionally challenging for some listeners. If you or someone you love has experienced loss, please take care while listening. Not for little ears. Now settle in, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and join us as we begin Until We Meet Again. Chapter 1. When Jim and I first saw the ad for the country chalet, it seemed like fate. My apartment in the city was cramped and noisy, and Jim hated every inch of it. The listing described a peaceful retreat surrounded by meadows and forests, far from the bustling streets. The prospect of open spaces and fresh air was too alluring to ignore. We responded to the ad immediately and arranged to see the place. The chalet was located on a sprawling property that felt like stepping into another world. A long dirt driveway wound through dense trees, opening to reveal an old stone mansion that seemed frozen in time. Its weathered facade bore the marks of age, cracks tracing patterns across the stone, ivy creeping up the walls. The mansion loomed like a silent guardian over the chalet, which sat a short distance away, snug and inviting by comparison. Stacy met us in the driveway, waving enthusiastically. She was striking, her beauty softened by the warmth of her smile. Stacy worked for the same pharmaceutical company as Jim and me, a serendipitous connection that immediately broke the ice. She carried herself with confidence, her eyes bright with a contagious energy. Stacy explained that she was rebuilding the mansion on her own, and while it was a daunting project, she spoke about it with passion. As we toured the chalet, Stacy shared glimpses of her life. The property was home to horses, dogs, and a blind elderly mare named Dee Dee, who Stacy had cared for since childhood. Dee Dee's calm demeanor and obvious bond with Stacy hinted at the depth of her compassion. Stacy's love for animals mirrored my own, and I found myself drawn to her authenticity. Jim and I agreed on the chalet almost immediately. It felt like a sanctuary, and Stacy's presence only enhanced that feeling. Our shared passion for improving lives through science and medicine created a fast friendship, one rooted in mutual respect. We began to see each other outside of work, spending evenings talking about advancement in our fields or simply enjoying the company of her animals. In those early days, Stacy introduced me to her philosophy on life. She believed in listening, not just to people but to the subtle cues of the universe. She told me once,
"Animals, the earth, even science, they all speak if you know how to listen to them."
Her words stayed with me, reshaping how I viewed the world. Our bond deepened over time. Stacy admired what she called my scientific intuition, though I often dismissed it as the product of growing up in a family of doctors. Her trust humbled me, and I admired her resilience and strength. I could never have predicted how deeply our lives would intertwine, or the shadow that would eventually fall over her vibrant spirit. At the time, though, the future seemed full of promise. The chalet became our home, and Stacy became more than a landlady or colleague. She became a friend, and soon a part of my family. Chapter 2. A couple of years into our friendship, the unshakable Stacy began to show cracks in her unrelenting resolve. It started with fatigue, subtle but noticeable in someone so driven. At first, I thought it might be the strain of managing the mansion renovation alongside work and caring for her animals. But then there were the physical signs, a slight thinning in her frame, bruises that lingered too long, and the occasional wince she tried to hide. She brushed off my concerns with a dismissive wave, assuring me it was nothing.
Just overworking myself,
She'd say, flashing that confident smile. I wanted to believe her, but doubt tugged at the corners of my mind. The call came on an otherwise ordinary day. Stacy's voice on the other end of the line was calm, but I could hear the weight behind her words.
Can you come over? There is something I need to tell you.
When I arrived at the mansion, Stacy greeted me with a forced smile. She led me to her kitchen, where 2 mugs of coffee sat untouched on the table. The dogs curled at her feet, sensing her unease. She gestured for me to sit, her hands trembling slightly as she slid a pamphlet across the table. Stage 4 breast cancer. My stomach dropped as I read the words. It felt like the air had been pulled from the room. I looked up at Stacy, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed small, fragile in a way I couldn't reconcile with her usual vitality.
They're starting me on chemo and radiation,
she said, her voice steady but strained.
It's aggressive, but there's a new treatment they want to try. I qualify for it.
I wanted to cry, to tell her how unfair this was, but I knew she didn't need my pity. Instead, I leaned into what I knew. Science. I nodded, keeping my voice measured. That's incredible, Stacy. That treatment is cutting edge. It's going to give you a real shot at beating this. Her eyes softened and a faint smile played at her lips.
You really think so?
I do, I said firmly, even though my heart ached for her. This is your chance, and you're going to fight this with everything you've got. The months that followed were grueling. Stacy endured rounds of chemotherapy that left her weak and drained. Her thick hair fell away, and her radiant energy dimmed. But her determination never faltered. I visited her as often as I could, bringing meals or simply sitting with her in the quiet. Our conversations shifted during those visits. We spoke less about work and more about life, her childhood with Dee Dee, the friends she'd made over the years, the dreams she still clung to. She confided in me more than she did anyone else, and I felt an immense responsibility to be her anchor. One day, as we sat on the porch of her mansion, she turned to me and said,
You saved my life, you know.
I blinked, taken aback. What are you talking about?
That day I told you about the treatment.
She said, her voice soft.
I was terrified, but the way you talked about it, you made me believe I could do this. You gave me hope.
I didn't know how to respond. I felt humbled and heartbroken all at once. Stacy's trust in me was overwhelming, and I vowed to be there for her no matter what. To everyone's amazement, Stacy responded well to the treatment. Against the odds, the cancer went into remission. 5 years passed, and we celebrated every milestone together. By then, Jim and I had bought a house near Stacy's, and she became a constant presence in our lives. My daughter adored her, and it felt like Stacy had always been part of our family. But the shadow of cancer was never far. One day, as we walked through the fields with Dee Dee following close behind, I noticed Stacy limping. I asked if she was okay, and she brushed it off, blaming an old injury. I didn't press her, but unease settled in my gut. A few weeks later, she confirmed my worst fears. The cancer had returned, and this time, it had spread. She didn't want to talk about it, and I respected her wishes, though the silence weighed heavily on both of us. She endured another round of treatments, but her strength was fading. Stacy, who had once been a force of nature, now seemed like a shadow of her former self. By October 2002, I realized I hadn't heard from her in weeks. When I called her, Her husband Mike assured me she was just dealing with a cold and needed rest, but something about his tone felt off. That Saturday, at 3 a.m., I woke abruptly. The room was dark, but I was acutely aware of a presence beside me. I could hear Jim snoring softly, but my attention was fixed on the figure standing at my bedside. It was a woman, her form glowing with a golden light. She had no distinct facial features, but I could sense her femininity. She was bald, and a large cloth was draped over one shoulder. She didn't speak, but she extended her hand toward me, her movements deliberate and almost reverent. I wasn't afraid. I sat up, reaching for her hand, but she stepped back, waving me away. Her gesture was clear. Not yet. The next morning I told Jim about the vision, though he dismissed it as a dream. I shared it with my colleagues and family, seeking validation for what I'd experienced. A co-worker, Emily, suggested it might be a cultural belief, that the dying sometimes reach out to those they trust most. I couldn't shake the feeling that Stacy was reaching out to me. A week passed in a haze of work, family, and worry. Then at 3 a.m., exactly 1 week after the vision, the phone rang. It was Mike.
"Stacy's asking for you,"
he said, his voice trembling.
"She's acting funny. Can you come over?"
I didn't hesitate. Chapter 3. The drive to Stacy's house felt longer than usual, the winding road stretching endlessly before me. The old mansion loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the darkened sky. The porch light flickered as I pulled into the driveway. Even the animals, usually vocal at this hour, were silent. Mike met me at the door, his face lined with exhaustion. He didn't say much, just gestured for me to follow. His movements were slow, hesitant.
"She's upstairs,"
he murmured. The mansion creaked under my footsteps as I climbed the stairs. The air inside was thick with something unspoken. At the top of the landing, Stacy's bedroom door was ajar, light spilling into the dim hallway. I stopped before stepping inside.
Over here. Rachel.
Her voice called softly. My stomach twisted. She had never sounded like this before. Fragile. Distant. I stepped further into the room and saw her standing beside the bed, completely undressed. She looked frail, her once vibrant skin now pale, her features skeletal. No eyebrows, no lashes, just the bare, hollowed-out remains of what cancer had taken from her. I instinctively turned away, giving her privacy. "Stace, you aren't dressed. Do you want me to step out for a minute?" She shook her head slowly.
No, it's okay.
She reached for a blanket, draping it over her shoulder in a familiar motion. The room felt impossibly still. I swallowed hard as realization dawned. 1 week ago at exactly 3 a.m., I had seen this. The golden figure, the draped cloth, the outstretched hand. It had been Stacy. I felt the blood drain from my face. She extended her hand toward me just as she had in my vision. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to move toward her, taking her hand gently in mine. She wobbled, her body weak. I helped her sit on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's get you dressed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't argue. Her limbs were frail, her breath shallow. Once dressed, I slipped an arm around her waist to help her stand. "We need to get you to the hospital," I said. She shook her head.
No hospitals. Rachel, I just want to be home.
Her resistance was weak, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed my fear. "I think you need a doctor right now." She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod.
Okay. But only because you say so.
Her trust in me even now, even in this moment, was overwhelming. Mike rushed to get the car ready while I guided Stacy down the long staircase. Every step felt surreal, The house that had once been so full of life now felt suffocating. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Stacy leaned against the window, her breath slow and shallow. I held her hand the entire way, as if I could keep her tethered to this world just a little longer. When we arrived, the doctors moved quickly. Sepsis. The cancer had spread too far. Stacy was fading. As they inserted an IV, she turned her head weakly toward me.
Is the med one of ours?
She murmured, the smallest trace of humor in her voice. I managed a strained smile. Yeah, Stacy, it is. She nodded, satisfied. Then the fever took her under. The rest of the night blurred. The hospital hallways filled with people who had loved her, friends I had never met, family members I barely knew. They all came. But in her delirium, Stacy called everyone by the same name. Mine.
Rachel?
Again and again, as if I were the only person she recognized. Some of the others didn't take it well. Who the hell is Rachel? I heard one of them whisper. No one had an answer. Chapter 4. The hospital halls blurred around me, voices merging into an indistinct hum. Stacy drifted in and out of consciousness, her frail body barely clinging to the present. Each time she woke, her eyes would search the room, and when she spoke, it was always the same name.
Rachel?
Some of her friends looked at me with quiet resentment, others with confusion. Who was I to hold this place in her final moments? Who was I to be called when they had known her for years? But Stacy had made her choice. I sat by her bedside, ignoring the murmurs. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was Stacy. She had fought so hard. For years she had defied the odds, pushing through every treatment with a determination few could match. But now her body was surrendering. At some point, Mike stood beside me, his voice low.
She doesn't have much time.
I knew. I had known since the moment I saw her standing in that dark bedroom, mirroring the vision I had a week before. I leaned in, gripping her hand. I'm here, Stacy. She didn't respond, her breath shallow, her body still. I could feel the weight of finality settling over the room. A nurse came in, checking her vitals, her face unreadable. Then she gave a small nod to Mike. It was time. I squeezed Stacy's hand gently. It's okay. You can rest now. And just like that, the rise and fall of her chest ceased. The world exhaled around us, and Stacy was gone. Silence filled the room, heavy and absolute. Mike let out a quiet, broken sob. Others followed, whispers of grief, hushed cries, but I sat motionless, my fingers still curled around Stacy's hand, unwilling to let go. The weeks that followed were a haze of arrangements, condolences, and unspoken grief. I helped Mike place the horses, found homes for the dogs, handled the calls he couldn't bear to make. But one thing weighed on my mind more than anything else. Dee Dee. Stacy's blind, aging mare had been her closest companion for over 3 decades. Moving her wasn't an option. Mike agreed to keep her on the property, to care for her as best he could. It was the only decision that felt right. Then, 1 month after Stacy's death, we returned from a short trip to visit my parents. As we drove home from the airport, we passed the road leading to Stacy's house. My 4-year-old daughter, strapped in the back seat, suddenly spoke.
Mummy, Aunt Stacy is so happy.
I turned to look at her in the rearview mirror, startled. What do you mean, sweetheart? She smiled, her little hands resting on her lap.
She has a new baby pony.
A chill ran through me. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Sweetie, remember? Aunt Stacy she's not here anymore.
I know,
my daughter said matter-of-factly.
but she's happy. She has a new pony.
I didn't say anything else. I didn't know how to respond. When we arrived home, the phone was ringing. I hurried inside to answer. It was Mike. His voice was quiet, edged with something I couldn't place.
Rachel, I had promised I'd call, but I couldn't reach you. Dee Dee just passed away.
I swallowed hard, my daughter's words echoing in my mind. Stacey had her pony back. Somewhere beyond this world, they were together again. And for the first time since her passing, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had never really left. And this is the end of my story. Thank you for listening. And this concludes today's story. Until we meet again, a tale of love, loss, and the connections that defy even death. Stacey's story reminds us that the bonds we build in life don't simply fade when we're gone. Sometimes they linger in the quiet moments, in the spaces in between, waiting to remind us that love is never truly lost. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt the presence of someone you've lost, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via podcast email, which is StoriesFablesGhostlyTales@gmail.com. Always happy to hear stories and tales from listeners and supporters, which is where today's story was sourced. And if today's episode brought up difficult emotions, please take care of yourself. Loss is never easy, but you're not alone. Thanks for joining me on this journey. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with someone who might find comfort in its message. Now, I want to thank the amazing supporters that keep this podcast bubbling along and skyrocketing to the moon and back. First up, I'm lucky to have my old Night Tea Titan, my pal, my friend, and amazing supporter, Matto Star. Matto Star, the brightest light in the darkest of nights. If kindness had a gravitational pull, you'd have your own orbit by now. Your generosity, warmth, and sheer unwavering support are nothing short of celestial. Shining bright even on the cloudiest of days, Matto. If there were ever a competition for the world's most empathetic, caring, and thoughtful soul, I suspect you'd win it without even realizing you were competing. Your kindness isn't just felt, it's experienced. In every single episode, your support goes right back into AI audio, right into music, and right into keeping this podcast lights on, quite literally. It's in the way you also uplift, in the way you make others feel valued in the comments and Patreon, in the way you turn even the simplest of gestures into something deeply meaningful. You don't just offer support, you make it feel like a warm cup of tea after a long, tiring day. The kind of support that reminds people that they're not alone, that someone out there truly cares, and that the world, despite its chaos, still holds good, beautiful souls like yours. It takes a special kind of person to not only listen but truly hear. To not just be present but to genuinely care. And you, Matto Star, embody that rare quality with such effortless grace that it's hard to put it into words. But if I had to try, I'd say this. You are a lighthouse in the storm, a steady hand in the unknown, and a reminder that generosity isn't just about giving, it's about feeling. Thank you so much, Matto Star, for not being just a supporter, a great friend of mine, but also a force of good. And cheers for being my pal. Have a wonderfully brilliant week ahead, Matto. And thanks as always. And now, I want to say thank you to my White Tea Warlords. I am lucky to have 4 superstars. First up is Lesosaurus Rex, the gym titan who could punch a ghost. Lesosaurus, you are the definition of strength both in muscle and in spirit. I can only assume you bench press the weight of my gratitude daily, and somehow I don't think that's even close to your personal best. If a zombie outbreak ever happens, I don't need a shotgun. I just need you and a good playlist. I have full confidence that you'd outlive the apocalypse, throw a ghoul into next Tuesday, and still have time for a post-workout protein shake. Thank you, you legend, for supporting the podcast with the same intensity that you bring to the gym. If ever we need a new category of warrior, one who defeats horror with sheer brutal strength, you'd be the first inducted. Keep crushing it, and thanks for being my friend, Leza. Have a wonderful week ahead of yourself. My next White Tea Warlord, Joseph Schroeder, the ultimate zombie apocalypse strategist. Joseph, if there was a most likely to survive the end of the world and love it award, it would already have your name on it, engraved, polished, and mounted for all to see. I don't know how, but I just know that if civilization collapsed tomorrow, you'd already have a bunker fully stocked, a battle plan mapped out, and a secret stash of tea just for moral boosting purposes. Others would panic, but not you. While they scream, you'd be 3 steps ahead, already fortifying the nearest stronghold. Thank you for your incredible support, Joseph, and for being the kind of person I definitely want on my side when things go south. If we ever find ourselves in a survival situation, I'll bring stories and you bring literally everything else. Thank you, Joseph, for being amazing, and have a kick-butt week ahead. And my next white tea warlord, Maya, the supreme queen of cats. Maya, if there was a kingdom ruled by cats, you'd be the unquestioned monarch, wearing a robe of fine fur, a crown of whiskers, and presiding over an empire of purring subjects. I have no doubt that should an apocalypse occur, while the rest of us are out there scavenging for supplies, you'd be commanding an elite squad of battle-hardened felines, taking down enemies with stealth and sheer catitude. A legion of trained assassin kittens? I wouldn't put it past you. Your support is as comforting as a sleepy cat curled up on my lap, and for that, I am endlessly grateful. May your reign as the queen of cats continue, and may your feline allies forever guard you against all things spooky. Thanks, Maya, for being amazing as always, and thank you for supporting me. Have a kick-ass week ahead as well. And my next and final white tea warlord, a huge thank you to you, Sangeetha, the dream walker and peacemaker. If dreams were roads, you'd be the guide leading lost travelers home. Your presence is like stepping into a place where the air is softer, the worries are quieter, and everything somehow makes sense. You don't just walk through life, you move with purpose, helping others find their own path, even when they can't see it themselves. That's a rare gift, and one that makes you invaluable in this world, and honestly, in any world. If peace had a protector, it would be you. Though I suspect you'd do it without the need for swords or shields, just with the strength of your kindness. Thank you for bringing light to this podcast and to those around you. Keep walking, keep dreaming, and keep guiding. The world is better with you in it. Thank you so much, Sangeetha, for your support, and have an epic week ahead. A huge thank you to all my white tea warlords, my pals, my supporters that keep this podcast chewing along. And now I want to say thank you to my fearless Elgrain forces, the dedicated guardians of mystery, tea, and terrifying tales. Your support keeps the shadows creeping and the stories flowing. A huge thank you to Jessica Garcia, Michael Krupp, Seductive Smiles, Jane Gumnick, Paige Kramer, Divided by Zero, Juicebox Andy, Just Heather, Peter Raffaelli, and Chad Warren. Each of you adds a special spark of magic to this podcast, making it a place where the eerie and the excellent collide. Thank you for being my heroes behind the hauntings and the creepy tales. If you like what I do, be sure to visit my Patreon, which is www.patreon.com/SFGT, where you can support me at any tier, and that guarantees you 1 week earlier episodes, higher quality audio, and of course my eternal thank you. And if you have any extra time, visit my iTunes page and leave a review there. It goes a long, long way in finding others like you, as marvelous as you, and putting it on their radar. Now, legends, have a marvelous week ahead of yourselves, and as always, till next we meet. Now, before I go, this outro is dedicated to the person that submitted today's story. I created this audio and this song just for them in honor of Stacy. I hope you all love it, and again, have a fantastic week ahead. Bye for now.
I first met you on an autumn day, in the quiet fields where the horses lay. You built a home from the stones of time, strong and steady like your heart and mind. We spoke of healing, of science and dreams, of love for the lost, of the spaces between. You showed me how to listen deep to voices silent, yet they speak. And though the came crawling near. You reached for me, I felt no fear. A golden glow, a touch so light, a voice that said not yet, not tonight. And though the light fades, you're not gone. You're the whisper in the early dawn. Not yet, you told me, not today. But I'll see you when the stars light the way. The world is quiet now, but I hear you still. In the rustling leaves, in the evening chill, and in the fields where your footsteps